Hey guys, Lucky here. Today we're going to go over what is quickly becoming one of my favorite builds this patch, the Whirlwind Barbarian. I've loved the Whirlwind Barb since it was in Diablo 2, and Diablo 4 has done a great job of modernizing this build while still retaining everything we loved about it 20 years ago. This build is incredibly easy to build and play. It melts through packs of mobs like a hot knife attached to a helicopter propeller. We'll talk about the skills, the gear, and a few uniques you can pair with this build, none of which are particularly difficult to get. Some you might even have laying around on your other characters. So let's dive in and talk about how to play the Whirlwind Barbarian. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about are the skills for this build. Let's talk about how it works and why it works. The first thing that we're going to grab is Lunging Strike. Lunging Strike is going to be our basic attack. This is what we're going to use to generate resources whenever we run out. And early on, you're going to run out of resources a lot. Later on, you're hardly ever going to touch this ability. So don't worry if you find yourself getting tired of having to use it. That's something that's going to go away later on for the most part. Lunging Strike is a really solid feeling ability, though. It does feel pretty good and it sticks to enemies like glue. So it's pretty fun as well. We're going to take Lunging Strike and we're going to grab Enhanced Lunging Strike, and we're also going to grab Battle Lunging Strike. This is going to add a bleed dot to our Lunging Strike, which is good. We're really going to lean into bleed damage with this build, and there's going to be a lot of reasons for that we'll go over here. The next thing we're going to grab is Whirlwind. This is going to be our core ability. This is what is going to do almost all of our damage. We're going to put as many points into it as possible. Everything we're doing is to make this tornado of destruction all the more powerful, and we're at the center of it. We're going to, of course, grab Enhanced Whirlwind, and then we're going to grab Furious Whirlwind, which again adds 40% of the damage as bleeding over 5 seconds. So more bleeding. For the passives in the core section, we're going to grab Pressure Point. This is going to give us a chance to make our enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Not really useful with the trash packs nor needed because we already make them vulnerable. But after the initial burst on the enemies, we need another source of making enemies vulnerable. And then this is what's causing bosses that we fight to be vulnerable throughout the boss fight. Then we're going to come down to the defensive skills section, and we're going to be grabbing Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry is doing a couple of really nice things for us. One very important thing that Rallying Cry does is it's going to make us unstoppable. This is going to be our CC break. If something stuns us, freezes us, slows us, anything, having Rallying Cry up makes us unstoppable. But it doesn't just make us unstoppable for 1 or 2 seconds like most classes abilities do. This makes us unstoppable for the full duration, all 7.4 seconds that this is up. We're going to be investing a lot into reducing the cooldown of this shout and our other shouts. And by doing that, we're going to get near 100% uptime on this shout, which is going to give us near 100% uptime on Unstoppable, which is going to make this build play and feel a little different than every other build that you're used to playing, because not probably used to having 100% unstoppable time. Now that's good info, but what do you do when you need a break from Diablo? Maybe boot up your favorite game like Call of Dragons, the sponsor of today's video. Call of Dragons is an MMO fantasy conquest game developed by the creators of Rise of Kingdoms. At its heart, it's a 4X strategy game with MMORPG elements that allows you to freely dive in and explore a fantasy world with unlimited possibilities. There's always something to do in Call of Dragons, like 8 unique raids where you hunt behemoths. Use strategy to master each behemoth's attack patterns to emerge victorious. When you enter a behemoth's lair, it's a fight to the death. Deploy infantry on the front line, cavalry ready to charge, and marksmen in the rear. Each of the 8 behemoths have their own unique guild-verse environment combat instances, offering your guild an unforgettable experience. A defeated behemoth will join your alliance and fight alongside you, becoming your secret weapon against other alliances. To the world, your behemoth is a terrifying weapon of war, but to your alliance, he's a loved companion. Name your behemoth and work together with your allies to train them. As darkness envelops the land, your only hope of survival is to stand together and fight. If you're tired of combat where the only thing that matters is which number is the highest, Call of Dragons allows for real-time tactical decisions on the battlefield, giving you true freedom to exercise your strategic know-how. Place your forces as you see fit and outsmart your opponents. So try Call of Dragons now on PC or mobile. Download it using my link below or scan the QR code and become a Beastmaster today. And you can use the special code CODMONSTER to get special rewards in-game. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to Diablo. So We're going to bring those cooldowns down. We'll talk about how we achieve that in a second, but so it's giving us unstoppable, and it's also going to be increasing our move speed and our resource regeneration. So this is going to be a great skill for quality of life while we're playing this build. It's making us so much more comfortable. It's making us so much safer, and it's giving us resource regen, which we can't get too much of. And resource management is going to be one of the toughest parts of this build, especially early on. Later on, by the time we have all the parts and pieces together, it starts to feel really good. Resource management isn't really a problem anymore. We're of course going to grab Enhanced Rallying Cry. This is the part that makes us unstoppable. And then we're going to grab the Tactical Rallying Cry. This is going to cause it to generate 20 Fury and an additional 20% resource regeneration. So this is giving us an extra boost of Fury when we need it to get that whirlwind going. It's also going to give us that regen, which, like I said, is something we can't have too much of in this build. We're going to grab Challenging Shout, which is another shout, and this one is going to cause us to take 42% less damage. That's a massive amount of damage reduction. So while this is up, you're nearly unstoppable. When this falls off, you're not nearly unstoppable anymore. So you really have to watch your shouts and make sure that they're up as much as possible, because while this is up, you can take a lot of hits. When it's not, you have to kind of position yourself just a little differently. Rather than standing in the middle of the pack with your tornado, you're circling around the perimeter of the pack a little more when this shout isn't running, so that you don't take too many hits simultaneously and fall over dead. It's not much of a problem, and you'll see in the footage, I mostly don't worry about it. I just pop it again as soon as it comes up. But if I'm fighting some especially dicey elites or something, when the shout's down, I'll be mindful of that. We're going to grab Enhanced Challenging Shout. This is going to make it so that we have 20% more life while the shout's up, making us thicker on top of that damage reduction. And then we also have, while Challenging Shout is active, you gain 3 Fury every time you take damage. This is huge, this tactical shout. So when you pop this shout, you want to be in the middle of the enemies, spinning around, because you want them to be hitting you. It's going to take you straight to full Fury. Again, resource regeneration is our #1 opponent for this build. As long as we have Fury, we're decimating, we're melting, and we feel good. And it's just a challenge of getting that up so that that's not a problem anymore. And this shout greatly helps with that. It's going to keep us alive, and it's going to give us tons of Fury. In this section, we're also going to be taking Imposing Presence and Martial Vigor. Imposing Presence is going to give us 15% more life. That's a lot more life, and it feels really good to have. It's essential because you're a barbarian. You're standing there in the thick of things. You don't want to build a glass cannon barbarian. And then Martial Vigor is going to cause you to take 9% reduced damage from elites. And elites are the only thing that are really dangerous. Elites and these freaking archers, man. Archers, just watch out for too many archers shooting you at once. If you fought against them before, you know what I'm talking about. Those things can hurt. They're deceptively painful. So just watch out for those archers, plinking away at you before you get close to them and get your disobedience procced. Next, we're going to grab Warcry, which is our third and final shout. If you might have noticed, we have 3 different shouts on this build, and the reason for all the shouts is that it's going to greatly increase our survivability, our resource sustain, our everything. These shouts are so powerful, and if you lean into shouts, then there's some passives you can get that make shouts all the more effective that we'll talk about right after this. But this one in particular is going to be increasing our damage by 15%, and then when we grab this passive, it's going to grant us 4 seconds of berserking. Berserking is going to cause us to do 25% more damage and increase our movement speed by 15%, which always feels good. So it's just another move speed buff on top of the other move speed buff. You'll see it on screen. This character really zips around. He moves really fast a lot of the time, thanks to a lot of these interactions that are happening here. Next, we've got Power War Cry. At least 6 enemies nearby. When we use our War Cry, our damage bonus is increased by another 10%. which feels very good. More damage is never something we're going to complain about. And then, like I was mentioning, there's some passives we can grab. Since we're running so many shouts, we want to upgrade our shouts. We want to invest in them. So this one here is going to make our shouts last 24% longer. That's good. That's important, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the shouts last as long as the cooldown. So we're bringing the cooldown as much as we can, and we're bringing the shout duration up as much, and we're trying to get those to meet up by increasing their duration and decreasing their cooldown. So this is how we're increasing the duration of the shouts. Then right here, Raid Leader, your shouts also heal allies for 3% of their max life per second. That's actually huge. While your shouts are up, because of this skill, you almost never die as long as your shouts are up, because of what they're doing for you, and because you're getting 3% of your health back every second, which is a lot of your health coming back in while you're fighting with your shouts up. In the next section, in the weapon mastery section, we're not actually going to be taking any weapon mastery skills because our bar is filling up really fast thanks to all these shouts, and none of these are particularly necessary for this build. We are, however, going to take advantage of a lot of passives in here. We're going to take advantage of Pit Fighter, which causes us to do more damage to enemies that are close to us, which is everything that we are hurting. And we're going to take No Mercy, which is going to cause us to do 9% increased critical strike chance against immobilized, stunned, or slowed enemies. all of the enemies that we fight are slowed. So we can stack damage to slowed or modifiers to slowed. We're making sure everything is slowed. And how are we doing that? Well, right here, hamstring, your bleeding effect slows enemies by 10%. So any enemy that we make bleed is also being slowed by 10%. Therefore, this is going to apply to them all the time. Every enemy is going to be bleeding because we're using a greatsword, and greatsword causes enemies to bleed. That's one of the things I'll go over in a second, is the arsenal system and what we're choosing and why. Next, we have cut to the bone. Your bleeding effects deal 18% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Every enemy we fight is going to be vulnerable for the first 3 seconds thanks to one of our glyphs, and then they're going to be vulnerable a lot of the time after that thanks to pressure point right here, which says our core skills have a 30% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So thanks to pressure point, we're going to get 18% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Then we're going to grab thick skin. We're going to get a point of this, which is going to give us fortify every time that we are hit. And we're going to put 3 points into counter offensive. It says while we're fortified for over 50% of our health, we deal 12% increased damage. That's multiplicative damage, which means it's big gains. So we want that. And we're also going to grab defensive stance, which says increased damage reduction gained while you're fortified. This is going to be another 4% damage reduction for free, or for these passives right here. And as for the ultimate section, we're going to take Wrath of the Berserker. Wrath of the Berserker is going to do some nice things for this build. It's going to give you more damage while berserking, and it's also going to increase your move speed. As a melee character, you're never going to feel like you're moving too fast, especially when trying to close the gaps on enemies and stuff like that. While Wrath of the Berserker is active, you gain 20% increased move speed. That's the first passive, and increased fury regeneration by 30%. This is the kind of critical part. We need an ultimate that's also going to give us fury regeneration. The only other ultimate that does that is Call of the Ancients, which makes it an acceptable alternative if you want to try it out. But we're going to be going with Wrath of the Berserker on this one. And the final passive, while Wrath of the Berserker is active, every 50 fury you spend increases Berserk's damage by 25%. You're chugging fury. Like, you are going to stack loads of this because we are chugging so much fury, which is why it's so hard to sustain this build. But once you have the sustain there, you're still using a ton of fury. It's just that it's not running out. So you're building up loads of that multiplier. And then before we go to the key passive, we're going to take Heavy-handed. Heavy-handed is going to increase our critical strike damage by 15%. This is multiplicative, so it's not going to add 15% to your other total. It's going to give you a nice multiplier there, so it's going to add way more than 15% critical strike damage while using a two-hander. It's amazing. So definitely grab that. And then we're going to go down here to the key passive, and the reason that resource sustain is so hard on this character is because we want to use this beautiful passive right here, which says our core skills deal 135% increased damage, but they cost 100% more fury. So it's going to cost twice as much, but do more than twice as much damage. So you're basically putting out over 2 times the DPS if you can afford this. Basically, you're going to run gushing wounds. I recommend running gushing wounds until like 60, 70, maybe even 80, depending on how long it takes you to get enough sustain to run Unbridled Rage. This is still a great passive. This is going to give you more bleeding damage and some nice multipliers there for the bleed damage, and overpowering a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that does more damage. It's not a bad key passive. It's very nice, but it's not going to feel as good as Unbridled Rage once you have enough fury coming back in all the time to sustain this for long periods of time. So what I recommend you do is every 10 levels or so, starting around like 60, or once you have a few of the aspects that give you resource sustain, once you've got a few of them, we'll talk about those next. And then try slotting this, and then go try to whirlwind through some enemies. And if you run out of like fury real quick, then switch back out of it. You don't want to use this if you're running dry, because nothing feels worse than poking enemies with your basic attack, trying to get your fury back so that you can whirlwind again. You essentially just want to be whirlwinding and shouting 100% of the time. Just whirlwind, 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 shout, 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 whirlwind, whirlwind, whirlwind. That's all. That's your rotation. And if you're having to whirlwind, basic attack, basic attack, basic attack, basic attack, whirlwind, basic attack, like over and over, then you need to switch back to gushing wounds until you can spend more time whirlwinding. That's where your damage is, and that's what feels good in this build. Before I jump into the gear here, I just want to note that I'm going to talk about some uniques that I'm wearing, but these are not really mandatory. The build feels amazing long before you have these uniques, and it can feel amazing long after you have these uniques. And for the hardest content in the game, these uniques are going to be great for Nightmare Dungeon grinding, but you would take these off and put on more standard, rare items turned into legendaries for like your Uber Lilith fight, because these are for Nightmare Dungeon clearing, and I'll kind of touch on that when we get there. For helmet, you're going to run the disobedience aspect. This is the one that's going to give you armor because you're hitting enemies. This is a very important aspect in the game. Every build in the game is running this right now. That's how good it is. That's how important having more armor is. And rather than tell you what stats you're looking for on each piece of gear, because my gear is very min-max, but it's not as good as it could be. There's a lot of pieces of gear here where one stat is good, but it could be a little bit better. And so on the written guide linked down in the description, I've got a section that has all the gear and all the stats on each piece of gear, as well as the aspect that you want on each piece of gear. And that's probably going to be a lot easier to build from than this video. So feel free to grab that link in the description below, click on that and open up this page when you're putting the build together, and you'll see the aspect for the helm as well as the stats. And you'll see the aspects for the chest and the stats and so on, so that you can just look at it at a glance and know what you need to do rather than listening to me babble through this all over again. But in this video, I'm going to explain why we're taking these aspects so you understand it, because that's also important. So we are taking this disobedience because armor is incredibly strong. It's way stronger than resistances, and so you need as much as you can get. On the chest, we're running Rage of Harrogath. This is a very optional chest piece. I'm running it because I'm hoping to reduce the cooldowns of my non-ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds, but it doesn't seem to proc that terribly often. At least it's not feeling that way despite some of the other stuff we're wearing to help it proc. It's a nice chest. It adds a lot to your damage because it is giving you 20% physical damage increase. It's giving you 12% critical strike chance against elites, and it's also giving you damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding. It's basically perfect for the build that we are running right now because we're making enemies bleed and we're doing a lot of physical damage. The Thorns line is unfortunate, but that's what uniques are. It's a little good with a little bad generally. All right, as for the gloves, we're going to go ahead and look for ranks to Whirlwind. The more the better. You want to look for something with 3, and then you upgrade it to get the 4th rank of Whirlwind on it. Next to that, you're going to want critical chance and critical chance against injured enemies. These are great stats, really good for our damage. And then followed by strength. Strength is going to be your main stat. It's going to be great for adding more damage to your build. And alternatively, if you end up with something like Lucky Hit Chance on there, that's not so bad either. These gloves have the minimum basic attack speed roll as well as Lucky Hit Chance because I accidentally salvaged mine while testing out Gore's. Oops, but it worked out. We found another decent pair of gloves to match. Gore's, by the way, is that's a pair of gloves you could use instead. This is nice. It's pretty good for clearing dungeons. If you have it laying around and you don't have a nice set of gloves to put on, you can go ahead and rock some Gore's instead. It's pretty good. It feels pretty good when you're clearing nightmare dungeons. If you do really difficult boss fights or something like that, then this really might fall off in effectiveness, and you might want to opt for something that gives you more critical strike chance like this. On the pants, we're running Temerity. This one is kind of important for this build. It feels really good with the build, and that reason this feels good is because we get an 80% barrier. So we're almost doubling our effective health pool is what this is doing. We're getting our health plus 80% more in barrier form, making it super thick, and we're getting this barrier filled up really fast because when we shout, all of our shouts are healing us for 3% of our health per second. So we overheal real fast, fill up this temerity barrier, and it feels really good. Alternatively, until you get these pants, if you don't already have them from one of your alts already, you can just wear a normal pair of pants with lots of defensive stats like damage reduction, total armor, and damage reduction from close enemies. Those normal defensive stats that you're looking for, that would be totally fine. And then a defensive aspect because it's your pants. On the boots, now this is one where the aspect really should go here. It's the best place to put this aspect, and it's because there's really not a lot of great aspects for feet, except for the Barbarian's case where you get the Whirlwind pulls enemies into you, it vacuums the enemies in, and stacks them nice and neat on top of you. If there's like an archer plinking away just out of reach of your Whirlwind, this will suck him into the pack and he'll die with the rest of the mobs, which is exactly what you want. And so that one you do want to put on your feet because it's a nice offensive aspect that you can actually put on your feet, which is rare. For our two-handed mace, we're going to put on it each point of fury you generate while maximum fury grants your next core skill 4% increased damage, up to 60% increased damage. That's huge. This feels really good. You're going to generate a lot of fury because you're going to have a lot of fury generation coming from some of the aspects we're about to go over very shortly here. If you're wondering, where's all the fury generation coming in to save the day? It's about to happen. But that's going to make it so that when you do cast your skill, it's doing 60% more damage for fat damage returns. For the first dual wield weapon, we're going to go with attacking enemies with a basic attack increases the damage of our next core skill by 9%, up to a total of 30%. So you get 30% increased damage times 60% increased damage. All these nice multipliers when you finally let that whirlwind rip, and you'll get into a nice rotation where you'll lunging strike a few times to max this buff out, then you'll pop your shouts, and then you'll go into your whirlwind and you'll get all those nice multipliers happening because the shouts increase your fury to cap off this aspect. Your poking of the enemy with your basic attack max out this aspect. Next aspect is a deal 15% increased damage while you have a barrier active. Well, you just overhealed with your shouts because of the temerity here. So you got this barrier up. So you're now getting this multiplier as well because you did the rotation in the order we're talking about. So you get that multiplier, another 25% increased damage. Boom. And then for the last weapon, Whirlwind's critical strike chance is increased by up to 16% for each second it's channeled, for a total of 48%. 48% increased crit strike chance after the first few seconds of it running. 48% increased crit strike chance means you're dang near critting 100% of the time, which is exactly what you'd like. Now for the jewelry aspects are really important. The first one here, skills deal 30% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast. Well, our fury should be maxed out when we cast because we popped all our shouts, and the shouts are regenerating a ton of fury thanks to this aspect right here on one of our rings. And your shouts generate 4 fury per second while active. And we have 3 shouts running, so that's 12 fury per second, filling up our shout bar, just boom, 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 in chunks, along with the increased fury regeneration from our stats on our gear, and our shouts that give increased fury regeneration, and our ultimate that gives fury regeneration. All these things making that 12 even more so. And then finally, we've got this aspect right here imprinted. Whenever you use a shout, the cooldown for the other shouts are reduced by 1.9 seconds per nearby enemy, up to 6. So you pop a shout, if you're near 3 or 4 enemies, you're getting a 6-second reduced cooldown on your shouts, which is huge. And this is a large part of why, it's not the only part of why, but it's a large part of why you end up with that cooldown working so well. For the stats on the gear, you're essentially, just to kind of sum it up, you are going to be looking for stats like increased vulnerable damage, increased critical strike chance, increased critical strike damage. That's kind of the mainstay for almost every build in the game. You're always looking for those 3 things, plus your main stat. In the case of the Barbarian, the main stat is going to be strength, so you're looking for that on all your offensive pieces. You're also looking for cooldown reduction, fury cost reduction, and then on the defensive side of things, you're looking for things like total armor increase, damage reduction, and increased health. General things that most builds are looking for. As for the gems that you're going to use, so you're going to put skulls in all of your jewelry because skulls give armor. Armor is an incredibly powerful stat right now, so we want as much armor as possible, and skulls give armor. So put skulls in all 3. For our weapons, we're going to snag tons and tons of emeralds. And this is going to give us a ton of critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, right? So we're loading up on that, just juicing up on the critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. So when we crit, dude, we crit so hard. When we crit a vulnerable enemy, we are massacring them. We are putting out tons of damage. In fact, if we look at our stats here, we have a listed critical strike damage bonus of 435%. We've been a little bit unlucky on our critical strike chance, and plus we're wearing gores right now, so we lost 10% crit strike chance trying out the gores, which feels good for nightmare dungeons. I would take it off for a Uber Lilith fight, and I would take the extra crit strike chance, but because we get the extra 48% crit strike chance from this, 48% plus 21%, so we're roughly at like almost 70% crit strike chance between those 2 things, especially if you're not wearing gores and you've got crit chance on your gloves like you should, and you've got better rolls of crit chance on your jewelry than I've managed to get. On the gear, the topazes are going to be probably the best in slot gems on the gear until you have fortified up all the time, which doesn't really happen until you've got the fortified passives and all of that stuff. So topazes early on, maybe for the first 40 levels, will be the best in slot thing to kind of wear, because you're going to be in the most danger when your shouts fall off and you're no longer unstoppable and something's going to CC you. And that's when you're in trouble. So those topazes will keep you alive. And then once you have basically 100% uptime on your shouts, that's when you switch over to your sapphires, which will make it so that damage is reduced while you're fortified, because you're always going to be fortified and you're always going to be unstoppable. So topazes really wouldn't be doing anything for you because you'll never get it because you're always unstoppable. And that wraps it up for the gems. Now for the arsenal system, which is pretty important, we're going to slot the two-handed axe, because if you slot it, you get 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Damage to vulnerable enemies multiplier is really powerful, so go ahead and take this. It's going to work really well for us. And because we're wearing the greatsword, we're going to get 20% increased damage dealt from bleeding, and we're also going to get 30% increased bleeding damage for 5 seconds after killing an enemy. As far as how we assign our weapons to our abilities, this is something a lot of people don't know they can do. They play the barbarian and they have no idea you need to open this menu. On PC, you press S. I'm not sure what the button is on console, but you press S and it opens up this little menu of your skills. Now, if you middle mouse click on PC or whatever it tells you to do down there at the bottom, if you click on that with the button that it tells you to use, right, it cycles through the weapons. You can see it here cycling through the weapons that I could assign to this. So for the lunging strike, I'm going to be using the greatsword. And then for the whirlwind, I'm going to be using the greatsword. You could assign anything to it, but we want the greatsword because we want to take advantage of multipliers, making things bleed, and all this good stuff that we're using in this build right now. As for the Paragon board, I've got that in the written guide linked down below. I think it's going to be a lot easier to reference that static guide when you need to than have me rattle off each individual one here as you're kind of going through the game. I think that's just going to be a lot easier for you. So I've got that in the written guide. That's linked in the description. That's also linked in the pinned comment down below. So grab it from one of those places. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more Diablo 4 content. Thanks so much for watching. And thank you so much to my YouTube members for going above and beyond to support this channel. If you want to become a YouTube member for behind the scenes footage, access to a private Discord channel, and get your name on screen during these videos, be sure to click the join button down below. If you're not sure what to do next, maybe swing by my stream. I'm probably playing right now, twitch.tv/luckyghost. You can ask me all about the build or anything Diablo or anything that you want. Otherwise, check out one of the videos popping up on screen right now.